Hello, my name is Sarah Miller, and today I am leading a workshop on cultural competence in the healthcare setting. Cultural competence is the ability to provide care to patients with diverse values, beliefs, and behaviors, including tailoring healthcare delivery to meet patients' social, cultural, and linguistic needs. In other words, we want to make sure that the patient feels comfortable by being aware of the norms of their own culture and tailoring their care accordingly. We do this by maintaining cultural humility, or as Rose puts it, a lifelong commitment to self-evaluation and self-critique. No one has all the answers, and that's okay. Being committed to learning about other cultures and seeing from the patient's own perspective is what cultural humility is all about. Being culturally competent is important because Latinos comprise of 30% of the U.S. population. It is estimated to grow to about 30% by 2050. Sometimes coming in for a doctor's visit is a foreign concept in and of itself for these patients, especially for recent immigrants, because in their home countries they might not have needed a prescription for medicines, as they might have used medicines from a folk healer or a curandero. In addition, immigrants often face barriers to appropriate health care, such as language, radically different cultural or religious beliefs surrounding health care, like in believing in traditional medicine by the curandero. Some immigrants might lack health insurance or legal documentation altogether. Some ailments disproportionately affect the Latinx population. Latinx instead of Latino or Latina to imply gender neutrality. For recent immigrants from Central American countries, like many of our clientele, there might be a lot of post-traumatic stress disorder and related illnesses from the armed violence that they're fleeing. For various reasons, a lot of immigrants face malnutrition. While not all Latinx communities in the U.S. live in poverty, 23% of Latinos in the U.S. are in this situation and find fast food cheap. In addition, a lot of working parents resort to fast food instead of buying and cooking food at home to save time. Sometimes pure acculturation makes people want to eat fast food. In other words, it's just the American way. A sedentary lifestyle also reduces the amount of exercise, and this in combination with poor diet can predispose these communities to health issues. For example, 11.8% of Latinos older than 20 years have diabetes. As seen in this chart here, the total number is higher when you consider the rising level of childhood obesity. Almost 43% of Hispanic adults in the U.S. are obese. Finally, the probability of suffering from cancer, heart ailments, and obesity are all higher for Latinos living in the U.S. than Latinos outside of the U.S. This brings me to caring for the patient and providing culturally competent care in order to helpfully close these healthcare disparities. You want to make the Latinx patient feel comfortable. Keep in mind that maintaining high dignity is an important cultural value, and you want to make your patient feel like they aren't being talked down to. They highly value not airing out their dirty laundry, so to speak, which sometimes makes patients nervous about talking about personal and family health issues. At initial contact, you want to maintain a steady voice, not too loud as to not be intimidating, but not too soft so you don't lack personality. Maintain eye contact at first with the patient, but don't sustain eye contact when they're talking because this can be condescending. However, if they're telling you a serious problem, then you'll want to look your patient in the eye. Titles are extremely important. Senora is generally fine for men, senora for married women. Senorita for young ladies is fine, but bear in mind that this implies that they're still a virgin, as it is an important cultural value that unmarried women remain virgins. Latinos use a lot of gestures. You'll want to gesture for your patient to sit down. When you're greeting your patient, a warm smile is inviting. Don't smile when the patient is talking unless they tell you a joke or unless they are telling you a joke, because again, you don't want to be condescending. Latinos are used to touch and being touched. A brief, firm handshake while placing your other hand on the patient's left hand or arm is welcoming. During the appointment, placing your hand on theirs can serve as a bridge to communication and can imply sympathy and understanding. However, it's not appropriate to do this with a male patient unless they're elderly or are crying. Using the greet approach will be helpful in gaining insight into the patient's background and assessing the cultural and personal baggage that they're bringing with them into the appointment. G is for generation. You'll want to know if they are a first, second, or third generation immigrant. This will often tell you how mainstream the patient is. Reason for immigration to the U.S. can be important, like if they're carrying PTSD-related illnesses or are facing stress from trying to find a job. It is helpful to know about their extended or nuclear family, as this is usually the patient's main financial and social support system. Family or familismo is a very important Latinx cultural value. Ethnic behaviors like heavy alcohol consumption during parties or the foods they eat can provide important health information, and time living in the U.S. can help you to gauge how used to American customs recent immigrants are. Latinx patients will use a more indirect way of responding, or indirectas, because in their culture it's the provider's job to ask appropriate questions. Also, Latinx patients generally don't want to lay it out right away, and they prefer to slowly reveal what ails them. It is important to be patient and keep probing your patients until you get the relevant information that you need. To gain access to their current medical issues, we'll want to use the listen model. L is for language. Even if you're using an interpreter, knowing a few basic words will usually produce a positive response and make a patient feel more comfortable. I is for illness. Patients will sometimes only come in after self-treating or remedies from a folk healer, the curandero, listed below have failed. Sometimes a patient will be unwilling to provide information because they're scared of confirmation that something is really wrong, like having cancer. In this case, drop the subject, continue to build rapport with your patient, and slowly come back to it later. S is for subject. Some subjects regarding healthcare are especially delicate. For example, for Latino women, the subject of sex is extremely uncomfortable because of the value of marianismo, or remaining a virgin until marriage. You can say, is there any aspect of your intimate life that you would like to discuss? Men generally are fine discussing most things except sexual dysfunction. If you suspect that this is an issue, you can just ask if there are aspects of his health that make him unhappy. T is for touch. Again, placing a hand on a patient can serve as a bridge to communication. Don't always do this for male patients. E is for educational level. In general, the more educated your patient, the easier it will be to obtain key information. A less educated patient might try to provide their own explanations for issues. If you suspect a patient is hiding something, Keep probing and carefully asking more questions to get the patient to describe the problem. You can ask questions like, can you describe this more? And what do you mean when you say this? N is for norms of the culture. Feminismo or family is very important. A lot of Latinx patients will come to the office with their families. While having a family there can sometimes be frustrating and appear to hinder the process, they often provide important information. Respect, or respeto, is another important cultural value. You can maintain the patient's respect by using proper titles, and if you're speaking Spanish, using the usted form. Abstaining from exhibiting any facial reaction is also important and helps you to refrain from judging your patient and maintaining respect. Once you have a diagnosis, you'll want to use the LEARN model of communication to tell your patient your diagnosis and course of treatment. After listening to your patient's description of the problem, you'll explain your perception of the problem. Do not ask for feedback at this point. Rather, acknowledge any differences in how you see the problem and how your patient sees the problem, or if the patient doesn't understand what you're telling them, relate it to something that they already know. Whenever possible, integrate your patient's suggestions into your approach. Then you'll recommend a treatment and if necessary, negotiate treatment. For example, sometimes it is possible to safely accompany folk remedies that patients prefer or are used to with medicines that you can prescribe. This is an example of a good compromise. Other strategies for creating a culturally sensitive practice include allowing extra time for patients with limited English proficiency, providing interpretation services for patients with limited English proficiency, hiring Latinx staff and physicians, posting bilingual signage, providing Spanish language medical handouts and patient forms, and recognizing Hispanic or Latin cultural holidays such as Cinco de Mayo. Thank you for attending my workshop today. I hope this was helpful.